What's up everybody, and welcome back to my studio. In this video we're looking at the Derwent Inktense Blocks, and we're doing a little review of them. So let's get started. The first thing I want to talk about is coverage. Large areas are hard to cover. If you pre-wet the paper, you might have a better chance. I didn't do that, and the results show. It was hard to get nice, even blends. It's also hard to control the saturation of the color while doing large areas. If I had it to do again, I would probably section the entire sky into multiple parts so that you wouldn't have to keep it as consistent throughout the entire thing. Coverage is pretty good, and the color is vibrant and pretty close to what the blocks look like. The white of the paper coming through the ink makes them a little brighter than the blocks actually look. Mixing the blocks with water obviously puts color into the water, and there is a certain point where you reach color saturation. This is good because it allows you to keep putting ink on without it becoming too thick. You want it to be at least a little watery, but overall the color goes down really smoothly and very nice. Now I've seen other people talk about the color lifting off of the paper, but I don't think that's exactly true. Everyone I've seen do this is scrubbing a lot. In my opinion, they aren't lifting the color as much as they are damaging the paper. They're ruining the tooth of the paper, which is pulling that color up with bits of paper. They're not really blending it away. Blending can be done very well, and that's the second thing we're going to talk about. If you pre-wet the paper, it gives you a nice, soft, bleeding blend that is really easy to work with, but you have to keep the paper wet. If you leave the paper dry, you can produce really nice, sharp edges. Blending is easy to do, but once it's dry, you're not going to be blending it anymore. And blending really only goes light to dark. You can't put a light color over a dark color, but if you can put all the dark colors over the lighter colors that you want. I'm used to oil paints, and in oil paints I can go light to dark, and then on top of that I can go light to dark again, and then light to dark again. No problems. With the Inktense, that isn't going to happen. The next thing is staying in your lines. You have to be careful with these. With watercolor, you can lift and blend out some of the color. But with these, one loose brush stroke, and it could be there permanent. You may never cover it back up. You might be able to cover up with the white, but there's no guarantee. I wish that more of the lighter colors had this opaque drying property to them. If they had a little bit more solidity to them, it would make a more interesting medium to use. But this was my first time using them, and as with everything, there is a learning curve to them. It's not like watercolor, it's a little bit different. Which brings us to the white. The white sneaks up on you. When you mix up some white, you put it on the paper, it goes down very translucent and then dries more opaque. But not like white out opaque. It's still sort of see-through. It can cover some of the colors, but putting color over it can be iffy. The top color seems like it wants to beat up. Almost like you're putting it on top of a wax. But not always. Some colors are different. I found it kind of hard to gauge which ones were going to beat up and which ones weren't. As well, small areas of coverage are no problem, but I felt I had a tendency to go too wet at first on the smaller areas. It's easy to mix up too wet of a color to use in a very small area. A second coating of ink over the entire sky helped smooth out some of the inconsistencies in the initial application, but was still left a little less blended than I had hoped for. Single colors can also be used light to dark, as the more color you add, the deeper that color is going to get. Going wet to dry with one color can give you a smooth gradient, which is a great effect. I didn't use much of the black, but in the places I did, I really liked how well it showed up, even over the other colors. The black covers up almost as nicely as the white does. When I used the brown color, I found it to be a little diluted in its saturation and wasn't pleased with it. But thinning the darker brown made up for it. The darker brown, thinned down, works very well to be a light brown. Better than the light brown did, in my opinion. The bright colors are very bright and show really well in single layers. Mixing colors seem to be dominant to whichever color was darker. If you mixed a green with the yellow, you didn't get a yellowish green, you got green. The blends I got on these little lovebirds were pretty good. They weren't perfect, but they were pretty good. Color saturation of the green really is great. It goes over the white, making these leaves really pop a little. The reds were very well done. Thinned down, they're a little too thin and a little too on the pink side, but they work. Adding a second or a third layer to them really makes them pop out from the color behind them. The orange and the reds go over the yellow very nice. I'm not sure if the yellow would go over the orange and the red with the same precision. When the red is pure, it really is a pure red and looks really nice. So this was my first test that I did. I took a piece of watercolor paper and I tried doing the grass as I would normally do it, light to dark. I knew light to dark was going to work with this, but I wanted to see how the dark to light and dark with white mixed would also work. I started by doing the yellow, then the green, then a darker green. As you can see, it works pretty well. The coverage of the darker colors, as I've been saying all along, really goes over the lighter colors nicely. As long as that color before it dries, you get nice sharp edges too. Doing the dark to light, you can obviously see that the light does not cover over the dark. You can see some of the light over the dark, which could give a little bit more depth and effect to some of the things you're doing, but just not enough. You may have to do a couple of layers of that lighter color over the darker color in exactly the same place every time to get it to look right. Now, as I said, when you mix the lighter colors into the darker color becomes dominant. And the white does act a little bit like a dark color. but putting the white in the green kind of gave you white. And then putting green over that white turned it back to a green color. Since I was happy with the way the light over the dark looked, I came in and did a couple of more very fine lines just to see how well they would show up against the lighter color behind them. And it worked exactly as expected, and it looks great. I started doing the grass with the white to break up that false horizon that I got while doing my sky. That horizon wasn't supposed to be there, and some of that color got misplaced below that fake horizon. You can see how the white covers the darker color but doesn't necessarily hide it. While I had the white mixed, I also used a little bit to soften the clouds. Dry brushing worked for soft edges to my surprise. On this section I'm using the greenish yellow over the yellow, and I don't think there was enough of a difference between the two, because the greenish yellow dries more yellow than it looks when you put it down. Now that I'm doing the grass, you can see that the greenish yellow was not very good. The green in it seems to flow to the bottom of the mark. If you were doing it flat, maybe you'd have a different outcome, but I found that the greenish yellow dries, leaving it more of a yellow to green fade than it did being a solid yellowish green, greenish yellow color. Which brings us to washes. A light wash over dark colors goes on nicely, but can kind of blend out colors and shades that are close to it. Washing over dry areas can leave a buildup of color where the wet meets the dry. That is hard to blend out without really going very wet. But, as I learned later on, unlike with my sky, if you wet the paper before trying to put down the color, you get a much more even and nicer wash over the entire thing. Going in for the final details worked out well, but only by sticking with that same light to dark method I keep mentioning. And white was used to bring some of that darker area back to life, allowing more color to be added over things without these colors becoming darker or faded. It really did work out well. All in all, I like the Inktense blocks. They're a fun little medium, and I'll probably use them again. But knowing a little bit about them now, I can plan out my next project a little bit better and figure out what I need to do to make it look more complete. So all in all, I liked them. I'll use them again. They're definitely a fun medium, but I wouldn't call it my favorite. So thanks for stopping by, checking out my video. If you liked it, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and please, I encourage you, leave a comment. I'll read every single one and reply to almost everyone. Come back again next week for my painting of a nebula background for a painting I'm going to be working on, and I hope you enjoy that one too. See you next time.